So great to have you here tonight, Robyn.
Thank you, Tanya.
So as always, we'll start off with an acknowledgement of country. And I know that we have participants from all around Australia tonight, joining us from every state and territory. The registrations have been amazing for this. So, but we're sitting at the moment on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present and future. And we also acknowledge that you are sitting on all different lands throughout Australia, which the traditional custodians have been on for much longer than we have.
So today, or tonight, so it's today and tonight, because we can see the numbers coming up now. I love a webinar. So
Yeah,
we're
it's
at
fun, isn't it?
32 now,
Yeah.
so that's good.
That's nice.
And so people are slowly joining. So apologies to those that are just logged on that we've already started. But we're going to cover, essentially sort of try and walk you through what's in the guide. And try not to just repeat what's in the guide.
No.
So Tanya's got some very cool case studies and some activities for you to do. But in general, what we're wanting to talk about is the guidance report was developed in collaboration with the Education Endowment Foundation, mostly as an introduction to the idea of why implementing matters, and that sometimes sharing what the evidence says, well, not even sometimes, a lot of the time, is only part of the story. It's a whole other kind of thing, which I'm guessing a lot of people on the webinar understand, is to try and get that evidence used in practice and that it becomes routine. So the definition of effective implementation from a implementation science point of view is that things become routine practice.
Yes.
So they're not sort of new and feel a bit odd, they become quite normal. So we are going to introduce you to hopefully a sort of really pragmatic framework for implementation. In implementation science, there are a lot of frameworks. It's how you do, generally when the science started exploding, people published a number of different frameworks where essentially they're theories of how you get something implemented. In fact, there's over 80 of them now in the peer-reviewed literature. What this framework attempts to do is take what's common amongst all the frameworks that have been shown to be effective and put that together in a way that's usable. So there's going to be some key lessons that you're going to hear about, like thinking about implementation as a process, not an event, which means sometimes people think of implementation as when we do training, and then they start talking about implementing, where what we've learned through the research around implementation science is it's a process of many things you have to do over a period of time, that leadership within a school is extremely important to support this, and that there are commonly phases or stages of implementation that all frameworks discuss, that we will talk you through here.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
So we thought we'd start with a quiz. Who doesn't love a quiz really on a Tuesday night? I think most people have been really looking forward to this moment.
I think so, all 35 of them.
Yeah, they're looking forward to it. So let's get into it. So we're going to launch a poll that you'll be able to participate in. And what we have is a series of 7 statements. And what we're asking you to do tonight is to categorise them into, is this an example of less effective, which will be answer A, or then is this an example of more effective implementation? So if you get straight into that poll, and we'll see your answers popping up as you go. We'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that.
And do we generally chat while that's happening?
We don't, but I think you and I can.
Okay, we'll see.
We can talk about implementation.
Maybe we might be distracted.
True. And remember, it's totally anonymous, so no fear in running that through that poll. Put your hands up if you can see the poll currently on your screen. Oh, look, it's just started.
2 of 34.
2 of 34.
5%.
Come on, people.
9, 10. Raising hands. They're raising
Oh,
hands.
yep, great. 13 people. So you can all see it. Go ahead, enter your answers. And we'll start going through the answers. Great, we're at 17% have voted.
Good.
It's exciting.
So the from an
20
evidence point of view, you can only ever expect 20% of people to reply to surveys. So we're on the up and up.
We're on the we're
30%,
above the
30.
General.
Come on, 10 of 35. Somebody else.
Yes.
31. Thank you. No, I'm not.
No. She left me hanging publicly.
She did.
Fair enough. All right.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, 51. That's great.
Slow down, Tanya. I'm trying to pay attention in the meeting too.
Oh, sure, no trouble.
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Let's start off with, we've got 66%, and I really think we should move forward at this point.
Let's do it. 69.
Yeah, 69.
Oh,
yeah. 70. Yep. Okay, great. So looking at that first one, a school decided on a few clear choices and pursued them diligently. This is, of course, an example of more effective implementation. If we take the opposite of that, which is a school takes on multiple implementation projects simultaneously, that's an example of less effective, and you've all answered that correctly at 100%. If we look at less effective strategies are stopped to free up time and resources, we can see that we have 96% have cited this as an example of more effective implementation, which is completely correct, because it is, because you can't keep doing the same things that you were doing and introduce new change into a school successfully. That is difficult. If we look at new skills, knowledge and strategies that are introduced through explicit upfront training, that is an example of more effective implementation. We haven't talked about the follow-up support, which we will be talking about in this webinar. And you got 89% of you answering that. For number 5, a program of activity is determined based on the evidence of what has and hasn't worked before. So evidence-informed decision-making. It's a definitely example of more effective implementation is to look at that evidence base such as that in the teaching and learning toolkit. And then we have training is reinforced with follow-up support from expert coaches and mentors. 100% of you agree with that. And we would strongly agree with that. Robyn will be talking to that too. Yeah, well, more importantly, the research, not just us today. It's underpinned by good quality research.
Science.
Yep, implementation science, the best science of all, really, for you, isn't it, Robyn? Or for people? For people, yeah, not just us. All right, behaviour change is attempted solely through mandated non-negotiables, followed up by performance-linked observations. Not so much effective as other mechanisms, because what we really want is people to buy into the change prior to introducing it, and we'll be talking through an example of that today in looking at Richardson Primary School. Well, you did fantastically well for a Tuesday, and especially we're in week 10 of the school term, so that's fantastic. All right, so now, because we're going to get a bit more interaction from you all. If you type, how would you define implementation? You can feel free to send it just to myself, and Robyn's here as well, she can read it as well, or you can send it to the whole group. So just let us know what your thoughts on implementation are, would be fantastic. Go ahead, people, dive in. Good to brainstorm before we do any topic. Effective education tool. Do we have any answers? If we don't, we will. Yep, you put plans in place, definitely. Thank you. Thank you for your bravery. Yep, evidence-based results into practice and follow through, action to make something happen, putting a plan into effect. It is very much the actual process of doing. Do you agree with that, Robyn?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, a planned sequence of activities with follow-up, revising what is and isn't working. That's very true of implementation and crucial to the process as well, is that we don't set something just in place. Did you see something that you love? I think you should read that.
The gap between implementation plans and school life is the stuff of tears and tantrums.
Oh, I love that. That's a lovely real world.
Tweetable.
That is tweetable. In fact, we
Belinda
encourage.
Parker, she works for CI.
Come on.
Now that's cheating.
That's cheating. You can't work for the company and then.
Implementation is a planned and systematic approach to ensuring something becomes a regular practice. Thank you, Belinda, from the Centre for Evidence and Implementation.
For that. That was spectacular.
Right.
But we encourage the last participant to tweet that out because I love the tears and tantrums. Because this change out of school can be very difficult, and putting this framework in place is trying to make it less difficult and more systematic. All right, fantastic.
So, well, I don't actually want to undo the fine work of what everybody actually posted on the web chat. But the definition the guys used in the summary report is, as you can see up there, it's defined as a specified set of planned intentional activities designed to integrate evidence into real world settings, or as Belinda's put it, into regular practice. So the reason the definition's important is not to kind of split hairs, but to help people understand that often when we talk about implementing something, people take for granted that it's just easy, you know, yes, we implement, we do things, we do Gantt chart project plans, we run training. So it just helps us when we're trying to look at what the research says about what are our best bets in getting something effectively implemented that is into routine practice. What can inform and what can help us ahead of time, maybe have a better shot at making it stick.
Yeah.
So it's just helpful to think of it as a process rather than just an event. Is the only point the definition matters.
I'm big on the evidence informed as well, but I'll take that point from you as well.
Okay.
So these are the recommendations and the framework that's found within the report. And you can see we have 2 in the foundation stage, and then we have another 4 that are spaced throughout our explore, prepare and deliver and sustain phases. Now, when you look at the guidance report, the bulk of it is really spent in the explore and prepare stages, because this is really the fundamental place to spend your time and effort prior to any actions being undertaken, is having a really thorough implementation plan, which we'll be going through tonight. So really thinking about that it is a complex process. There are various different stages, and spending a lot of time in that pre-planning and documentation stage is crucial to effective implementation and making a plan stick and getting more of the practices that you want in the school in the end. So you can see this is just another diagram taking us through the cycles. As Robyn was saying before, they're not discrete. You can be moving backwards and forwards in these cycles. You're spending a lot of time in the explore and prepare stage. If your school isn't ready, you'll be moving back and forwards in that prepare stage and making sure that everyone's really ready to adopt a change prior to diving into the delivery. Then within the delivery, you're really thinking about what are some beginning activities that we can do, so what's some upfront training, and then what's some follow-on support. And then in the sustain, we're really thinking about how we can scale this up across the school effectively, which can be really quite a complicated procedure. So this is some checklist questions when we're thinking about implementation. And then here are some responses from practice when looking at Richardson Primary School. And these were led by Jason Borton, those of you you're all in the education sector, when he was at Richardson Primary School in implementing feedback and collaborative practice within the classroom. And so these are within the program logic model. So when we're thinking about this, we're thinking about how we're going to use a staged and structured manner. Within schools, really important to have that upfront training, and then supported by instructional coaching, so that it actually moves into habit forming practices where we see changes. they really spent a lot of time setting up that they were going to, it was a long-term change project. It wasn't just a quick flash in the pan. We were doing this for a couple of weeks. It took them 3 years in total to run through this process and see actual important changes in students' learning outcomes. That was the focus, was effective collaboration and feedback. So what are some of the things that we can do to really set the stage for good and effective implementation? So we need policies, routines and practices that are already established within the school. These can't be established overnight. No, they can't. They take work. Mm-hmm. We need there to be leaders in implementation throughout the school. So within every layer of support so that everyone feels represented. At Richardson Primary School, they had a teacher-led implementation team that trialled different practices. And then we're building leadership capacity through those implementation teams. So here's another example as well that we drew within the practice guide, and this is drawing from a case study that we developed up with AITS or with the feedback implementation materials. And within this, they developed dedicated leadership teams, and this is a school found in the Northern Territory. It's a P to 12 school, quite a small school, and they were finding that they had specific barriers to change. So the first thing they did was identify those, because you need to say, what is the playing field that we're currently working with? They found that students were perceiving feedback negatively, which is, I think, not an uncommon occurrence throughout Australia, throughout the world, no doubt. They then created a detailed implementation plan, and then they had in-house professional learning and building specific capacity in the staff and the students in providing and receiving feedback. And then they developed a set of implementation outcomes, because we need to know where we're heading to, what are the behaviours that we want to see, and how we'll monitor that throughout the process. And they monitored those through walkthroughs and observations, and also had regular problem solving as it occurred.
Can I ask you a question about that? I know this is off.
No, I think that's the dynamic
something,
nature.
Yeah. And maybe people you can also use Q&A option. I just want to acknowledge to everybody in the webinar, both of these case examples do sound very easy. It's
Yes.
not easy.
No, it's not easy at all.
And so was some of that measured?
Yes, and we'll be going into further detail around all those points.
Okay.
It is not easy, and the way we measure that is really focusing in on, and I don't really need to tell you this, Robyn, but on fidelity and acceptability, we'll be monitoring throughout those, and we'll be looking at specifically how to, and outcomes. Okay. Students' outcomes and also teacher outcomes.
All right, so
it's a lot more complicated.
Yes, for sure. And particularly in a school environment, we find, because there's so much structure that, and teachers can't walk in and out of classrooms and PD and etc. So build leadership capacity through implementation teams. So that the main point to this bit of content here is, and to be honest, I think this has got to be one of the hardest things to do in schools.
Yes.
In the implementation science literature, and admittedly, this isn't always in the education literature, there is some level of evidence that working in coalitions or teams together to make implementation plans and monitor and be accountable for the implementation is more effective in terms of high quality implementation being achieved than single people trying to do them by themselves. That makes very good sense. The thing is, the composition of these teams has been shown in literature to be very important. That is, they are supposed to represent the parts of the system that you are trying to change. Any work that we've ever done in schools around implementation, teams are notoriously hard to hold together because it takes time of teachers out of the area. Schools have so much going on already. Why this initiative over other initiatives? So where possible, the use of teams can lead to things sticking more However, we've been doing some work in schools that are sort of trying to figure out, okay, if you can't have like an in-person team, how do you create virtual teams, or how do you enable the people to be involved in those teams without actually physically having to be at more meetings? But it is where possible, and I'll keep saying that, a good structure to put in place, but quite difficult in this setting.
Definitely. And leaders really need to allow the time and the space for
Which is
those
so
teams
hard.
to meet, which is really difficult. So we know that within schools that, and really I think we can say more broadly, that trust is one of the most essential elements in order to allow our staff to take risks. And we know that, to me, trust can be defined as the distance between what you say and what you do. And we have to build that on a daily basis with our teams, making sure that there's little distance as possible. What they did at Richardson Primary School, which was have agreement scales, which was where the teachers would rate where they were in agreement on a 5-point like scale, to say where they felt they were in their agreement to bring a new practice into their classroom. And they would wait until everyone had a high agreement before introducing a practice. And so they use that as a way of monitoring the acceptability over time, which we'll go into. So, and it's really about the school leaders working alongside and really having a strong belief that this will make a positive difference and that they know exactly what they are going to change.
So here's the phases again. I think we can go quickly. We've walked through this a little bit already.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. This is our
phase by phase.
This is our phase by phase.
Phase by phase.
So this is our impact evaluation cycle. You can see there. And in the explore phase, we're really dealing with those first 3 steps, which is the impetus, the awareness, and the analysis stages. Really crucial in schools, and which can be really difficult, is to have a good look as to what is the problem that is occurring within the school and how can we think to solve this, rather than coming from the other angle of, this is some new PD that we have, we'd like to apply it to the school. So it's really not having a solutionitis approach is crucial to making sure that we can implement effectively. And within this, we're really thinking about how can we specify a tight area and make that as specific as possible and set outcomes around that as well. Short-term, long-term outcomes that we can measure against so that we know that we are making progress. At Richardson Primary School, Jason Vaughan, he identified that there were significantly low levels of achievement in both reading and writing. If we have a look at the type of detail that we can go into when identifying specifically what is occurring at the school and what we would like to see less occurring at the school, we can see that example there, which is from the EEF implementation guide. And it's really looking at the different types and categories of the people affected.
Yeah, in terms of trying to identify what the actual issue is going to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is where, are you saying that they identified a series of barriers?
Yes.
Yeah, and facilitators, it looks like? No.
No, not yet.
So just
barriers.
Facilitators are coming.
Facilitators are coming.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
That's the only reason for that would be, wouldn't it, that you'd want to up things that kind of help and use your strengths and
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And over time, see more and more of the behaviours that you'd like to see and less of the less effective behaviours retiring. So think about an area of improvement within your school. We're just trying to ground this within the practice of what you're doing currently that you think is amendable to change, and we'll just let you do that as we proceed on. So add anything to the chat box that you think is relevant there.
Read Andrew out?
Yeah, that's nice. Do you find that the problem isn't the problem? It seems that those in education assume the problem rather than rigorously getting to root causes. I think both Robyn and myself, can I speak on behalf of both of us, would say, you know, you really need to start with a thorough data analysis from your school to identify where you think things are not heading in the direction that you'd like. Yeah. Hunches are supported by data collected in the school 100%. 100%. It's lovely. Yep. And once you've got to that point, then you're really at the stage where developing a clear implementation plan.
Or at least your best guesses to go back to, because it's difficult to be able to figure everything out that far ahead of time. Yes. So, but I can see these comments. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, someone said triangulation. That's like one of my favourite words in the world.
Good.
Yeah, love triangulation. Yeah. Data triangulation is a joy.
Can everybody read these now?
Yeah, everyone can read these. So we can do whatever we want.
Okay.
All right, so we have the why, which is what we were just talking about, which is really specifying what the issue is. And then we define the what, which is the active ingredients, which is a lovely turn of phrase coined by our dear colleague, Professor Jonathan Sharples.
And others. Active ingredients is a very well sort of tried and tested. In fact, it's difficult because active ingredients would imply that we know what the effect of an active ingredients are, and we don't.
No, I know, but
sometimes we call them common.
Oh, you call them common
because you don't
ingredients.
Want to give them, I think the point that the guide's trying to make here is it's very difficult to implement something that isn't sufficiently defined or described. And as people develop practices and programs and think about what we want to be doing and infusing into our education practice, it's easier to understand how to turn things into business as usual that are described in a way we have a sense of what to do and how to improve on it. So I think the concept of the what is extremely important in implementation work. And active, common, essential, core, they're all things that just need to be described better up front. And it doesn't always, unfortunately, happen with the things that we're trying to implement.
No. But crucial.
Yes.
And being I'm a chemistry teacher, so the active ingredients
makes sense.
I like a lot. The how, which is the implementation activities, and there's a direct line of sight from the active ingredients to our common ingredients to our implementation activities. We need to know that this is what we want to be seeing more of in the school. And they're linked directly to what we need to.
Can I just respond to Carly? That's a really good point you just made. You have so much data that sometimes it's hard to get through it. With the work we're doing in schools, I would say, my goodness, yes.
Definitely.
It is. I sometimes wonder how people make choices behind what's important and what's not. So there is a lot of data for sure that we could wind back. And,
yes, we are drinking from a fire hydrant. Definitely. And that's why I guess with this work, we're not saying, definitely not saying implement more measuring techniques. It's more use the measuring techniques that you're using, triangulate that data, come up with the way you're going to move forward, and then start monitoring with those rather than adding additional. Would you agree with that?
I would also say ditch some data.
Yeah, ditch some unnecessary data. As long as you can triangulate, though, we've got to triangulate. All right, then the how well, which is our implementation outcomes. We're looking at the short, medium, and the long term to let us know where we want to go to and then how we're tracking against these. And then the so what, which is our students' outcomes, because that's why we're all here. That's why you're all here giving up your Tuesday night. It's because we believe we can make a difference to the learning of every student in Australia. That's why we do this. That's why we wake up in the morning. All right, fantastic. So, active ingredients.
I love how you gave me the active ingredients.
You might like to use a different terminology.
I know,
and I encourage you.
No, but I think we've already discussed this briefly,
yes.
And it's hard to do, and it's particularly hard to do when you have been given intervention program or practices that weren't necessarily of your choice, or they're owned by another group.
Yes.
So that is all very well. We spend a lot of time trying to describe for schools what the ingredients may be.
Beautiful.
To do it, because it doesn't always come that neat.
No.
And yes, Lisa, accurate data can be a challenge, and I totally get that. Sometimes, though, I found maybe not worrying so much about how totally accurate the data is, but you just have some information to get your best guesses. Otherwise, we'd all be waiting for a very long time for guides. I think accurate data can also be hard in big schools, in any kind of initiative.
Definitely. Because testing is just time and point.
Qualitative, quantitative, yes.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Mixed methods all the way.
Yeah, I think what Lisa's saying there, though, is that sometimes it ends up being the data we use are more on the qual side.
It depends. Are we talking about the primary setting or secondary? I think it does depend on what year level we're talking about. In that regard.
And yes, also the person that just said that. So we often say in implementation, you pay attention. Somebody does something about what you pay attention to.
Yes.
So totally agree with that.
So here are the active ingredients that we've looked at Richardson Primary School that they've specified. So they had 4 key active ingredients that they moved forward with and focused in on for 3 years with a consistent focus. If we just have a look at one that we'll take through all of tonight's presentation, and that's the scoreboards and walkthroughs. So they collaboratively develop those up together, which is what you were talking about just a second ago, which is with your work with schools, is always focusing in on working together, if at all possible, because we know that we'll bring more people along with the change. They detailed 4 different feedback practices, and then the teachers went about unpacking those statements of what does that practice actually look like? What are we looking for? And then they used that as a scoreboard when either leaders or teachers were walking through the classrooms, and they would see, could they see that practice occurring, yes or no, and then over time monitoring that. So if you can think of active ingredients that are currently running in your school or that align to when we were talking about before, what's an area of practice that you want to improve at your school, if you can let us know some of those that you think would be useful. Yeah, beautiful. Peer coaching can be incredibly important in moving from really having an idea and moving into changing practice within the classroom.
Yep.
Yeah, spirals of inquiry as an overarching framework to lead the change. I would see that as the scaffold that sits behind, and it's very similar to the one that we presented. I think all change frameworks have similar elements because they're all drawn from international research, like the one we're presenting here tonight. Yep. So it might be a good time to develop some active ingredients there. So in this next part, you're really thinking about those active ingredients and what you want to see. So you're going to go and have a look at the evidence base and have a look at what has worked and what hasn't. So
I take it on the E4L side.
Yeah, you would.
That was a segue.
I think you would be directly going there.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got the link there as well. The link's there and the interface there. And feedback, we know, has the ability to lift learning by potentially 8 months, according to meta-analysis. So, and really looking into that evidence base and interrogating it and then deciding what that means for the school. So they decided that, Richardson Primary decided that feedback would be their focus. They were really looking at formative assessment as well, and they had the teacher-led feedback group that would try out different strategies, see if they were working on a small scale within one classroom, and then look to scale it up a bit more. Another source of evidence base is the guidance report. Of course, we're going through it tonight. We are. One co-authored by one of your Vaughan employees.
Staff, yes.
Yes, Vaughan Bianca. What we'll be doing throughout this year, we'll be releasing other guidance reports that you can use as an evidence base as well. So one on teaching assistants, parental engagement. And then probably most excitedly for me is metacognition self-regulation, which is something I'm pretty passionate about. Parental engagement, though, is important as well, and teaching assistants. Shouldn't really have favourites, but hard not to with that crowd. So in thinking about evidence-informed decision-making, I'd like everyone to type into the chat box how long they have been in education for me. Just pop it in. How many years? Pop your years in. 11, beautiful. 33, high five to that. Oh, wow, 21, 16, 38, 19, 19, 20, 14, 37, 10, 8, 33, 10, 9, 12, 8. So we've got amazing experience in this virtual room. And so what I'm saying to you is don't put that to side. Combine that with the evidence base. That's why we say evidence-informed decision-making, because you bring your whole self, you bring your whole professional self with all that experience to the table, and you combine that with the evidence in front of you. So really not thinking about prescription of ideas and really thinking about your context. And that's why it's super important to delve into the data at your own school and use your own judgment.
Okay, well, the only thing that really matters with these next two slides is the idea that, so in implementation science, there's been a history of people developing frameworks, and you've got an example of one that's been developed in the context of this report. One that's developed's been sort of drawn on from other frameworks. The other important, and this is a really hot topic in the field, is the concept of what implementation strategies could be put in place that will enable implementation or effective implementation to be realized and therefore outcomes to be achieved, because there's no point putting all this effort to implementation if we're not getting the outcome. And the implementation science gang globally have all been writing about and thinking about how can we define the various implementation strategies? So these are the how rather than the what that you can use to try and get your innovation implemented to good effect. So these are just two tables of examples of this poor guy for his PhD that wrote, identified over 75 different implementation strategies that have ever been named ever in the universe. So everybody owes their career to Byron Powell. And we encourage people to try and think about and lean on these. Again, for an education setting, I am going to put a bit of a caveat on this. This literature has not come from the education literature, so there will be things in here that read very clinical, because in the main, the authors of this paper, where this tables were drawn from, were our clinical clinicians. So just caveat, sometimes these things don't automatically transfer well into a school setting because they weren't necessarily studied there.
Mm. Lovely.
We're good.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
So in really thinking about effective professional development within the implementation process, we know that a big part of this is the upfront training. And really for this to be effective, it needs certain different elements within that include reflecting on their existing beliefs and practices for staff to reflect on those and then challenge those in a non-threatening manner. So perhaps with a quiz at the start.
Like a quiz.
Yeah, like a quiz. And then we really need to make that training interactive with active learning throughout and have observation, meaningful discussion and reflection. They need to be demonstrating those skills and really have the ability to have lots of time for deliberate practice and provision of feedback within that. And really suggesting to focus in on both generic, so the overview of the concepts involved, and then delve deeply into subject-specific pedagogy, which really is beautiful. Using a range of media is always useful. After that, really to follow up with some solid coaching. This enables us to make sure that when they're being observed within the classroom and then afterwards, if they talk to their coach, really to see what are the fine nuances of changes within their practice that they need to be making and to make these as routine as possible. Really working with skilled coaches, people that understand the practice well. Sounds like a lot of the work that you've been...
Well, it depends, but yes, so technical, the education area actually taught a lot of, demonstrated very well how important a training plus approach is, and coaches in the field who understand the innovation you're trying to implement. So you have to be very particular about your coaches. And another bit that's tricky about it, particularly in Australia, is resource. I mean, coaching is all very well, but, you know, asking people to fund resource and give it time. And there's not necessarily a history in our training, our professional training, to being watched and supported to take on a practice. So it can be very confronting for teachers and early childhood educators, and because it's not a normal way in which a lot of us were trained, unlike the US and the UK.
Yeah, that's very true. And like any type of professional development, most useful if it's done over a long period of time, 2 terms, often longer. So really thinking about how does change happen in a school, and we're really starting to look at the way people and getting people to change the way they think and what they believe in. So teachers, leaders and students thinking that there could be a different way is really the starting point. And then we see teachers, leaders and students practicing using evidence. We see changes in skills. And then we see them trying something new, so changing what they do, changing that practice. And then the end goal, the increase in learning. And upfront training will really get us to points 1 and 2, but we know that the follow-on support, the coaching, is going to help move people into changing actually what they do within the classroom, and then that's going to have the flow-on effect into impacting the students' learning.
You just keep going on that.
Yeah. So looking at Richardson Primary School as our primary example for this evening, and within the guidance report, we're looking now at the end and saying, well, what does it look like? What were those active ingredients? And we know that there were 4. There were the learning intentions and success criteria, building that student capacity, it's that peer and self-assessment, and the scoreboards and the walkthroughs are crucial. Then we've got the implementation activities, which have a direct line of sight to our active ingredients. We've got our professional learning to build those skills in the active ingredients. We've got monitoring through agreement scales, teacher-led working groups and walkthroughs with scoreboards. And then we've got our coaching, so that we're really seeing movement in people's practices and making sure we're providing our teachers with feedback. We've got our short-term, medium and long-term implementation outcomes, and they're specifically focused on fidelity and acceptability, which we're excitingly going to dive into soon. And agreement scales were really used to ensure that the school was ready to implement a new practice. And we had the teacher-led working group was observing each other's practice and also then collecting the student work to determine whether or not it was having a positive impact. So looking at our implementation activities, we can see that at, these are the ones at Richardson Primary School. So a lot of professional learning followed by the way that they were monitoring was with the agreement scales, making sure that they were having collaborative discussions. That's where they got to with the walkthroughs and the scoreboards when they were further developed, and then the coaching as the follow-up support to ensure that we are seeing those changes in practice. So if there's any implementation activities that you can pop into the chat box, do that now. I'm going to hand over to Robyn to delve into the really beautiful part, I think. Yeah, lovely. Professional learning. Looking at the Australian curriculum standards, how to assess these.
Liam's got a good question there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's that is a good question. That is a good question. Active ingredients themselves, or are they active ingredients? Well, they're the active ingredients themselves, and then there are strategies that underpin those that will vary slightly throughout the time. So, for example, the learning intentions and success criteria, what will those look like in practice? So, for example, the success criteria are differentiated and they'll be improved in their use throughout the school and then improved in the students' abilities to measure against those. Hope that answers your question. Yes. Good. I'm glad you're happy. Yes, that's lovely. Yep. Really important one. Allowing teachers to observe the change in other classrooms and help them feel safe to implement them themselves. We know that both the deprivatisation of practice, which is quite difficult to achieve within classrooms, that can really help spread effective practice throughout the school, which we're not particularly effective at in Australia or anywhere really, but it's difficult. Yep, mentors and mentoring with the time provided. Exactly, lovely. Really useful strategy.
Right, so Fidelity, we're here.
Yes, we are.
we are. Sorry, I was reading
right.
the endless references at the bottom of the page. So look, the only thing that, okay, so the definition of fidelity is that, okay, fidelity only matters, and that is the extent to which when something is being implemented, it's being implemented in the way it was intended. And that means by the content, by the dose, so the amount of times it's implemented, and by the quality of that implementation, because something can be implemented to plan and just be done in a very rubbish way, so it will make no difference. So the contemporary definition of fidelity, those three things. Fidelity only matters, though, when you know the thing that you're implementing needs to be implemented in a particular way to get the effect. It does not matter when we don't know that. And so people get really caught up in measuring fidelity, which goes back to the data point of there's just a lot of data we're already collecting. We could all just, you know, be a bit more practical. So fidelity is important when we know to get the effect, that we should keep within some boundaries of what the plan was, so we don't lose the quality or the effect of that very good evidence-informed thing that you're trying to do. Acceptability is a slightly different concept in that if something isn't, and this makes total sense, this is an absolute no-brainer comment, if something isn't acceptable to the stakeholders who need to use it, it's not going to get implemented no matter how good our plans are and our training and our coaching. So something like acceptability is something that you might want to do a little bit more upfront in your exploration phase and less so in the implementation phase, because you're hoping you've figured out the degree to which something is acceptable before you're kind of getting in place. So these are different ways to evidence how well you're implementing. But again, another sometimes big elephant in the room with Fidelity is, where's the improvement part of it?
Yes.
Right? So something, you know, certain things need to be implemented in a particular way, but context is context, particularly in Australia. Places are different. So another hot topic in implementation is the degree to which you want to show fidelity to something versus any acceptable, okay, adaptability of that, because there's no way we're taking anything to scale in Australia unless we have some way of ensuring some adaptability of it, particularly in our diversity and with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island kids, and there's just a lot we don't know. So it's an important concept, but in my experience, I find it gets a little bit lost in what's the whole point of measuring all of this anyway, the outcome. Yeah. So that's my Fidelity chit chat. And I think that you really does the job there. Yeah. So you guys really can. Yeah. Yes. And same with acceptability.
That, really.
Yeah. Thank you.
Lovely. So what does fidelity look like in action? So if we look at Jason's plan here, and if we're looking at just one element of that, which is looking at the regular walkthroughs with the scoreboards, what are we going to see over time? And you were talking about, well, do we see an increase in their understanding over time? We should. And do we see the scoreboards being used in different ways over time? So increasingly, first there's just an understanding of what is actually a scoreboard, how to use it, they're using it. Then it's starting to lead to be practically used in an observation setting. And then they're actually drawing from that data to have that feed their practice. And then if we look at acceptability in action, what did that look like at Jason's school? If we're looking at, he started off with those agreement scales. And as you were saying, we really don't want to be starting anything unless we've got high agreement, because it's just not going to work. And that's really the way Jason proceeded. And so we can see that it's initially in the monitoring. In the short term, we see increasing agreement scales, but they already started off pretty high, or else he wouldn't have introduced them. They have high agreement scales over time, and then finally, the practices have become embedded. That's the final acceptability. Is it happening? Yes or no, really, isn't it? Are we seeing more of what we want or less of what we want? Less of what we don't want in that setting. So then if we jump to very quickly, this is what it looked like at Jason's school. And then we'll end off on this, and I'm just going to get you to read this, you being the audience.
Right, that was good. I was hoping.
Yeah, I know. I saw your face. You were like, I'm not doing that, Tanya. So please give this a 1 or 2 minute. This is an article that we'll be publishing on the 15th of April that I wrote with Jason Vaughan, so he was the example school, and Professor Jonathan Sharples. And this is really focusing in on that sustain section. And now, excitingly, we're going to move to live questions. So if anyone has any questions, love perfect timing. That's 5 minutes of questions. Type them into the chat box. And you've been chatting. You've been very participatory
Is this more than normal?
Yes, I think you've encouraged them
I'd like to.
because you've just been very interactive with the chat box. So I think you've really brought everyone else. All right. Oh, that's a great question. Oh, actually, I know Liam. So
That's uncomfortable.
No, as in I taught Liam at a PD session in Canberra, so still a little uncomfortable. Okay, now do you want to start? And do we want to tag team this? I like this though.
What sort of evidence do you think is worth collecting before practice? Wow. If you want to take something, I mean, here's the elephant in the room. We don't know how to scale. So if you're talking about, we have an idea and there's theories and there's hunches, but if the definition of scaling broadly in the sort of implementation science globe is that you're reaching about 70% of your intended population. Thinking of more from teacher groups to whole school. Right, so that's helpful, Liam. Where you wouldn't really, if you're going to take something from a group to a school, you'd want to have, I hope, a pretty good understanding that either the thing does achieve the outcomes that you intend it to, because none of us want to spend that much time doing something that makes no difference or in fact does more harm, which is what the cool thing about having an evidence base to draw on is helpful. But if it's not that, but it's something that is enabling better team development, or so it can also have an element of enhancing teacher well-being, which is also good for down the road implementation, rather than just focusing on everything to be an evidence-informed practice within schools. So I think it's just sort of careful consideration of your context and what you're trying to do. And yes, copy of slides. But we're involved in a variety of things. Some of them are to get evidenced approaches embedded within a school, and some of them are to get what I would describe are some of the no-brainers that are just going to be good for people, teachers, kids, and principal well-being, that we don't need to test over and over again to prove its effectiveness. We just need to help schools be able to use it, and this is mainly to do with well-being and teachers and principals taking care of themselves.
But you can measure that too, yes?
Yeah, you could measure anything. That's the problem.
You can.
Yeah,
you can.
we shouldn't.
How much? You shouldn't measure everything, but just the important things.
Yes, yes.
Lovely question.
What time frame do you think we should be allowing before we see an impact on student outcomes, Tanya?
Well, this is a tricky one. It just depends really on the approach that you're implementing and the scale that you're implementing it in. I would say always being more generous with the timeframes than not. Like as we used in that example there with Jason's school, it was 3 years. We should be seeing improvements, but seeing significantly sustained improvements will take us about 2 to 3 years. And we need to be patient with the process. And I think that's a bit about what this framework is about, is being prepared for the long haul and knowing actually the practices that you want to see. Once you're seeing those practices, then to really start measuring, are we seeing then the outcomes of those practices in changing students' learning outcomes? Definitely like that question. Did you want to? Bit of unintended.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Again, it worries me sometimes. Yes, we could, if we just focused on impact, miss secondary effects, but I think we're all getting a little bit better at understanding that. Again, I don't want to encourage any over measurement, because I just really feel for schools and everybody in the world about the amount of measurement we get people to do. But again, it depends what your question is behind that. If you're measuring the impact of something, then you're talking about a particular design of study, which I reckon, Andrew, that may not be what you're thinking, but it's definitely worth digging into secondary effects if we've got time. But sometimes it's just figuring out what's the least amount of effort we can make to get something implemented for a good outcome as well. And sometimes secondary outcomes can be implementation outcomes, but yeah, it just depends on your design or what you're thinking behind that question, but it is important.
Yeah, definitely. to track if there's any unintended outcomes, and they can be positive or negative. So if you want to follow up with our work, you can join more webinars that are coming up excitedly. I think the next one was going to be on the feedback implementation materials that I'll be co-presenting with Eitzel. If you'd like to subscribe to our newsletters, we've each got a newsletter that comes out every month.
So yours a little not as regular.
Yours not quite as regular, but don't judge them for that.
Yeah.
Maybe go to Twitter.
Yeah.
You can follow us on Twitter. We're also on Facebook, and there are our emails for any feedback on this. And Shona will be following up with email that will provide you with a video link in case you would like to watch us again, and all the slides and any of the resources that we're involved in today. It's been our pleasure to be with you.
Thanks,
here
everybody.
Tonight.